In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ, the true light, who enlightens and sanctifies everyone who comes into the world, cause the light of your countenance to shine upon us, that in it we may see your unapproachable light, and guide our steps to the doing of your commandments, by the intercessions of the Most Holy Mother of God, and of all the saints. Amen. Yes, so we're carrying on from where we left off. We're talking about the passions, and I made it clear that the passions are not necessarily good or bad things. These are things which are required in our spiritual life, but have to be properly directed and controlled. St. John of the Ladder says something interesting, that we have a lot of these passions for good, that we're supposed to have anger, otherwise we'll never have any sense of righteousness or any sense of what is wrong or evil. And we need to be envious of the saints and so on, things like this. And we've turned them all into causes for evil. We've turned the anger against our neighbour. We've turned the envy into a sort of hateful jealousy. And it goes on like that. So I want to talk a bit about these passions, and usually, for the most part, we're going to be negative, because usually our experience of them is because we're far from mastering them. The first one I want to talk about, though, I think is an exception. It's, I guess, commonly called, there's lots of names for it. Commonly, I guess it would be called sloth. Another term is despondency, or tedium. And this is probably the only passion that I guess it's called a passion, but in a way it's the absence of passion. And as a result, it's probably the only one that you can't really be turned to good in many ways. It's interesting, in the prayer of, the main prayer of Lent, the prayer of St. Ephraim the Syrian, we ask that, God, we may not have a spirit of sloth, idle curiosity, love of power, and useless chatter. So it's the first passion that's addressed, because we know that this is the passion which really, it renders any sort of progress in the spiritual life impossible. It's basically a spiritual laziness, a kind of, I guess you could almost call it cynicism in a way. And it's easy to confuse it with being tired, or like, I'm too exhausted to do this and that. But what's curious about this passion is that it only seems to arise really when it comes to the spiritual life. And often it can take the form of being really active and busy. So we would always use this as an excuse. Like, in fact, I think we clergy suffer from this quite a lot. We'll be so busy, we'll have things to do in the office, I've got phone calls to make, I've got things to do, just so we don't end up actually doing a church service, or saying our prayers, or doing the things which we should be doing, but we'll always find some excuse to take us away from those things. So we could actually be quite active, but there's this spiritual idleness. And this arises for many of us in many aspects of life. A lot of the time people say, I can't get up for church in the morning. But they'll get up 2 hours early to go to work. Or they'll go to the airport to meet a friend, or they'll say, I'm too tired to go to the evening service, but they'll go out to the pub. And this is what happens with this form of spiritual laziness, is that we may try to find the excuses. We'll say tiredness, lack of time, but you'll always notice we do have the time and energy for other things. And in a way, this is a passion that can't be turned to good, because in a way it's this kind of, you're just kind of stuck in this pit where you don't want to, there is no passion there to control or to redirect. It's an absence, a lack of interest. So it's a very difficult one to deal with. And a lot of the time, a lot of the fathers say that prayer is the response to it, but often this is what makes prayer impossible to do in the first place. So it's often a very difficult one to deal with. And we would often have to use, sometimes what would motivate us would be, sometimes certain things that might happen, or certain emotions we might feel, or even certain senses. For example, sometimes what snaps us out of that indifference, if we're going to look at the home, for example, would be, the sight of an icon, the smell of incense, the sound of church music, whatever it is that sort of snaps us out of that tedium. Sometimes these things can help. There's been a lot of people think of the senses as something negative, like, it's all sensual, it's something that's going to draw me away from God. But again, like the passions, it can go either way. My spiritual father always said, that the God and the devil use exactly the same doors to reach us. And it's true with the senses, we see it in church all the time. So that's, I guess, one passion which I guess can't be good or evil. It's pretty much always bad. Another passion that I guess we want to talk about is the passion of anger. I think a lot of people have an issue with this one. And I guess its opposite in the virtues would often be called meekness. And the problem with these is people always associate them with personalities. So a meek person is someone sheepish and quietly spoken and doesn't ever raise his voice. And that's not the virtue of meekness. Christ said he's meek, and he smashed up the markets outside the temple. He told the Pharisees that they were going to go to hell. He constantly rebuked people. Meekness isn't being sheepish. And in the same way, anger, the passion of anger, isn't being hot-tempered. And this is another thing, is that you do have different personalities within the church. And within the spirituality, when we're talking about overcoming our passions, it doesn't mean a flattening of human personality. It doesn't mean that I'm going to cease to be who I am, that we're all going to be exactly the same. There is diversity in the church, that we are not meant to be the same. And the more we cut away and control our passions, shall we say, the more we discover our true selves, which is always distorted by these sins and passions, the more of our unique personalities we discover. If you look at the saints, you might get a lot of people try to cut out all the humanity in the lives of saints and present you with these boring pictures. But if you actually really do read about them, you'll see that there's so much variety amongst them. And the sanctity is manifested in different ways. I love someone, C.S. Lewis said, how monotonously alike all the great tyrants and conquerors have been, and how gloriously different are the saints. When you think of it, when you look, it's evil that's boring. It's always the same. They're always after the same things, always have the same attitudes. With holiness, you find personality. So you have even amongst saints who are hot-tempered, who they might have a short fuse. It doesn't mean that they have the passion of anger in that sense. That someone might snap like that and sort of lose their temper in that way. But the passion of anger is something that really is not always apparent. And it actually usually can really poison your whole heart and mind. I've seen people, for example, being yelled at, a lot of abuse, and I say, wow, I'm really amazed how you took that. And they said, you have no idea, I want to rip that person's head off. I have no control at all over my passion. Outwardly, they may not respond, but inwardly, there's the complete loss of control, the kind of the vehemence that someone can feel. And this is what's far more damaging for the passion of anger. And often anger is actually, we talked last time about pride, and anger is often the result of pride, because a lot of the time what we are angry about is wounded pride. There's many different kinds of anger. Like I said, Christ, when he's angry, this is righteous indignation. He's angry at sin. But when that ends up becoming hatred for the sinner, that's what we have to tread that very carefully. And this is why it's very difficult to master these passions, because the one you can easily overstep a line, and you've gone into the area of sin. So this is why the spiritual life is the reason we have all of this sort of asceticism, all this prayer, all this teaching to try to help people to master these passions, is because it is a lifelong journey of constantly training yourself to master these passions. It's not easy to do. So anger is often the fruit of pride, which is the one thing we have to be careful of. It's not the same as losing our temper. It's something that's often inward and not always apparent. And also we have to understand that there are cases where we often have to become angry. I mean, parents, teachers, they often have to rebuke their children or their pupils or whatever, so they understand right and wrong. We have to master these passions, because if you start doing that, if you lose control of that, and you start allowing the anger to control you, and you're reacting out of a sort of a loss of love, complete anger or hatred, this is where things become really problematic, where, rebuking someone ends up becoming a really nasty insult, for example. So we need anger, because without it, to be honest, we're just completely indifferent. No one can have no anger at all. But it's not just, it's something that really, it needs to be sort of brought into the spiritual life of the church. It needs to be tempered with humility and patience. Similarly, you have, we said before, with envy. And, again, envy, like we said, can be good. But often it's the result of, again, pride, wanting to be better than the other person. And it can also, it can often arise out of something positive. It can, out of love for somebody, and if that person shows more attention to somebody else, that love, which is a positive thing, ends up being distorted into something that's hateful. And this is, again, if we talk about the main virtue of all, we talked mainly about pride and humility last week, but the greatest of all the virtues is love. And this in itself, however, is not, although we speak of it as the greatest thing of all, a lot of people are accustomed to thinking of love, that's just, oh yeah, that's good, there's nothing else to it. That's not really the case. If we're going to talk about Christian love, yes, because Christian love is actually a love that has been purified of these passions. It is a love that is for all people, and that it's not dominated by pride, and it doesn't show partiality or favoritism. And that's the word agape. Other forms of love are eros, like sexual love, intimate love, philia, which is like friendship, and storge, which is compassion. And these forms of love can be good and bad. I can love my friends, and that's a good thing. But if I start treating those who don't belong to my circle of friends unfairly, because I love them so much, or if for example, my friend does something really bad, but I take the side of my friend just because he's my friend, well, that kind of love's been distorted. This has been taken away from the area of Christian love, and it's become distorted. It becomes something that's dominated by passions. Compassion is even the same. It may not seem so, but, we see it all the time with parent-child relationships, don't we? You spoil people rotten because you think that compassion means whatever they want, giving into their demands. Sort of an excessive pity can be damaging. It can also mean that, you show too much compassion on one person and ignore somebody else. So we have to be careful even of that kind of love. And eros, of course, sexual love is the most strongest of the forms of love. And that's the reason a lot of the church fathers actually use that word to describe the highest degree of love for God. The saints were in love with God. They're often called erastestou theou, as in people that were in love with God. But because it's the most passionate form, it can also be the most destructive, where you can become envious of the person you love, and so on. But also, it can also, obviously, its most distorted form is unbridled lust, where instead of the sexual gratification becomes the ultimate goal, where you end up loving something just for its physicality more than for anything else. And that cannot easily happen with sexual love. So all the forms of love are like the passions. They can be good or bad. But they must, all those forms of love have to be directed by agape, by the Christian love. And then you can have, they find their proper place and proportion. If I have agape and philia, then I won't show partiality, because I have love for all people. I love these people as friends, but I'm not going to do something wrong on for them as a result. I can love a woman, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to end up sort of losing control because I have agape. Same with compassion and so on. So even these positive things like love can be distorted by the passions. I'm happy to stop there for a minute. Sorry? Parents who cover up crimes of their kids, yeah. I mean, you could... Yeah. It's always a difficult one, admittedly. But, and it's, not, I mean, whether, what the right decision to do in cases like that is not always clear, but certainly what is clear is that sometimes the love can cloud, your clear judgment. So yeah, even love can be a dangerous thing. There are so many other passions, I can't go into all of them. With, I guess the other thing, staying with love, is that, it can't be understood, if we want to understand what it means, it can't be understood on its own. St. Paul speaks of three virtues. He says faith, hope, and love. Love is the greatest. But in Orthodox spirituality, these are all seen, they're like the trinity of the virtues. They are not separated. You can't divide them. If you take all those three together, it gives you an understanding of what love means in the Christian life. Because everyone says, a lot of people say, oh, you're Christian, you're supposed to love. Meaning, I'm supposed to accept everything that which isn't the case. There's faith as well, and there's hope, right? So you can't, love on its own is too vague an idea. But if it's connected with faith, not only, that doesn't just mean belief in God, it means a relationship with Him, faithfulness to Him, loyalty, and hope in the resurrection, in His blessings, that the here and now is not everything. It gives you a better understanding of what we mean by Christian love. Because a lot of people with love, they also forget. There seem to be these two sort of contradictions. The one is that it's just all about love, and the other is it's all about the asceticism, praying, going to church and fasting and all of this stuff. What we don't realize is that these actually go together. The whole purpose, really, of all the asceticism and fasting and praying and everything is to acquire perfect divine love. Anyone who says love is all that matters, I mean, most of the time they don't have love themselves. Everyone has it to some degree, but no one has perfect love. And you can't just acquire it because it's not some feeling. Christ asks us to do some very difficult things. And He says, love your enemy, turn the other cheek. I mean, how many people really have that kind of love? That's what we're aiming for. So, the battle with the passions, it's not just, what's the point of all this? The whole point of it is to actually try to acquire that perfect love. There's a classic work of Christian spirituality, Orthodox spirituality, called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It describes the progress of, it was written for monks, but the progress that the monk would make in 30 steps, and each step is a passion or a virtue that has to be conquered or acquired. The last one, the highest of them, is love. And that means that, it's at the beginning, obviously, of Christian life as well, but it's the ideal at the same time. So we have to understand that love it's not just a feeling. It's a state of being. It's almost like being like God. And that requires mastery over the passions. If I don't learn to control my tongue, I'm going to offend people by telling, I'll say a distasteful joke and I'll offend someone without even thinking. I'll let a secret slip without thinking. I'll always be gossiping. If I don't control my desire for food, I'm going to be others will be hungry because I'm stuffing my face. If I don't control my greed, people are going to be poor because I can't have enough. If I don't control my pride or my anger, I'm going to lash out at people when I'm in a bad mood, take it out on other people. All of these things go together. So we shouldn't have this idea that this whole fighting of the passions, it's all about feeling guilty and beating yourself up. It's about trying to learn how to truly love. Going back to what we said before, we're not aiming for morality. We're aiming for spiritual perfection. Are there any passions that you, in particular, you want to ask about, or virtues you want to ask about, which I haven't covered, because there are plenty of them? I don't think it was Dante that invented it. There were 7 sins. In Christian Orthodox spirituality, there are 8. There's anger, there's vainglory, there's pride, despondency, I think dejection, lust. I can't remember them all. There were 8. And what happened, I think it was St. John Cassian, he was an Eastern Orthodox Christian living in the West. He introduced that list, I think, to the West. And then it was Pope Gregory the Great. He reduced it to 7. There were a couple of sins he could have collapsed into one. He saw vainglory and pride, for example, as the same thing, so he put them together. And I think dejection and despondency is one. He put them together and then added envy. And it ended up becoming 7. And that became really influential. It's not a big deal, but it's just in Orthodox Christianity, in our spiritual writings, they often talk of 8 vices. But both ideas are kind of correct. Yeah, the 7 sins, I guess you know them all. Avarice is basically greed for money or wealth or luxury. Gluttony, we're thinking of, yeah. Yeah, there are 2 different forms of greed, I suppose. Yeah. There's gluttony, avarice, anger, lust, laziness or sloth, pride. What was the other one? Sorry? Envy, yeah. Oh, yeah, envy, yeah. I have to watch that Brad Pitt film again. Well, I don't think he came up with it, though. He didn't come up... maybe he made it famous, he wrote about it, but I don't think he invented it. It was already... Right, yeah, he has it in there, obviously, yeah. Yeah, the idea of 7 sins became very strong in the literature. Mm. And then, but not obviously, not by any means the only passions. But I guess they felt that they described them fairly adequately. But often, for example, in the Eastern Christianity, in the spirituality, for example, vainglory and pride are sort of seen as 2 stages of the same passion. So they're often connected.
So the bad one takes you away from God. For example,
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be more akin to what I said before, that kind of spiritual laziness. Yeah. I think sometimes people connect that, feeling sorry for yourself, with despondency. Some may even say that it's part of pride in a way. Mm-hmm.
But then he could also be right.
It's true, and that's why we're not supposed to judge. Because, to be honest, yeah, I mean, actually I said to someone the other day, he was getting angry about someone blaspheming or something. I said, don't try and be like Christ smashing up the markets, because you're never going to pull it off without sin. No one's going to be able to pull it off. And it's very easy to basically say, because it was Christ, there was no sin in it, and to judge someone else who does. But I don't think we are often in a position where we can discern where there's pride. Discernment is actually considered another very high level of virtue, where you are able to discern the right way of acting and so on. It's never that clear, and it's a difficult one, because sometimes you get people who they always, you can go a bit far, constantly questioning. It's like, oh, have I done something wrong? Did I sin? And you can go crazy thinking like that all the time. There is, I'm always cautious of that, the constant fear of sinning. I know a lot of people are shocked when I say, stop doing everything just for fear of sin. But that does annoy me, to be perfectly honest, because it's something that just paralyzes you. I mean, you try as you might, you are going to sin, right? And I would prefer that you try to do good and fail than that you never try anything because you're afraid of sinning. In fact, there are church fathers who say, there are some times when your motive may not be totally pure, whatever, but you've got to try anyway. So that we shouldn't have this completely paralyzing fear of, because I know there might be I might fail, or there might be some ulterior motive, that I'm never going to do anything. Like we were saying about, I don't know if we were saying before, but about charity. Yeah, that someone could say they can feel good about themselves or show off, but I mean, is that a reason to be a Scrooge the rest of your life? Yeah. So these things are there. I mean, we need to bear these things in mind, and these things are there to sort of help us to grow in our spiritual life. But they shouldn't be there as these kind of, like I said, these things that just completely prevent us from ever trying at all and just living in complete fear. That's not the point of these teachings. The point of these teachings is to help us to purify these passions, purify our hearts. And along the way, we're going to mess up. Along the way, we're going to fail. And, even the most, people, advanced sort of virtuous people, they still fail. And it's part of being a Christian, is that failure. And for as long as we have that humility to recognize that we've failed and to get up again and keep going, then that's what the spiritual progress means. And, it's interesting when we're talking about humility, I said the saints never realized how holy they are, but they've made that progress. There's this brilliant quote I had about saints, where it says that what was wonderful about saints is that they were human. They made all the same mistakes, but they just kept pushing on. They wouldn't give up. And that's what we have to do in the spiritual life. So, I can talk all day about mastering anger. Fact is, tomorrow I'm gonna screw up on that one. I'm gonna yell at somebody, whatever it is. Does that mean I'm just going to give up and say, what's the point? We have to keep trying. And eventually, usually, without realizing it, we're going to make some progress. There's like I said, there are so many different passions you can talk and virtues you can talk about. Patience, the slander, hypocrisy. There's so many different things, but they're all. I think they're all rooted really in what we started with last time, pride and humility, and those are sort of the two antitheses: to be like God, to be like the devil.
Just trying to work out, so you've got the sin, which is supposed to be negative, but they're also
Yeah. These are commonly called passions rather than sins. Yeah.
And then you've got also virtues, and are they also passions?
Yeah. No, they're not always synonymous. Usually, when we talk about virtues, we are always talking about positive things. So we don't usually speak of anger as a virtue. We speak of it as a passion. But I guess the virtues are more like, we wouldn't call anger a virtue, but the passions, I guess when there are virtues is when we've mastered those passions. I'm saying we need the passions in the sense that, as just the basic sort of instincts, if you like, you could call them, themselves, they are not in themselves bad. But the virtues are never really negative. Virtues are never negative.
Something to the extreme.
Yeah.
Of passion to the extreme becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So something that's a virtue to the extreme, because that would become more of that.
Even there have been cases where I've read of some stuff. St. John of the Ladder comes to mind, where he even speaks of some of the virtues. He speaks of exile. He was talking about a monastic idea of sort of detachment and so on. Or there were some virtues where he said that we have to be careful to not go to extremes with these. But don't overdo it. But there are cases where you can go to extremes. I guess. Patience. Patience shouldn't mean inaction, though. I think we make that confusion. But even for example, I'm trying to think of a case where a virtue could. There was a case I read about. But anyway, I think there was I can't pinpoint it to a particular virtue, but there was a case where I think the idea of detachment or something it could become too extreme. I can't remember the exact case, but I think there are cases where virtues themselves they also have to be controlled, I suppose, in a way.
Because the way I see things, like keeping grass in mind.
Yeah.
So the virtues are positive, say passion can go negative, but through any sort of religious Christian life, you basically mean it up and down. But it's by knowing that you're actually now going a bit too far, so you curve it and bring it the other way. So by inaction, it could be something that's too patient about it, and you that can turn to inaction.
Yeah.
Left it too long. By getting angry about it and then turn it into an action, you do something about it.
Yeah.
Rather than just like saying Jesus and journals, it all sorts like that.
Yeah.
Leading it to God and whatever, but you've got to actually get going angry too far and then start.
Well, also, it sort of comes to another point, where is the kind of patience that actually is an action really patience? Is that really a virtue? Or is it more like despondency and sloth, where you use because we can often use the virtue as an excuse to act a certain way. This is where hypocrisy comes in, where often we would present the passions as virtues, This is why it can get very complicated in the spiritual life.
The passion of the Christ.
Yeah. Passion of the Christ. But the passion in that case means suffering.
Okay.
Not the passions in, But in the Greek, there has the same. They use the same term, bathi, and bathos and bathi, which is it's actually an interesting point, really, when you think about it. That there's the connection of suffering as well, in the sense of inward suffering, if you like. It does connect to what we said before about how we understand sin isn't about transgressing; it's missing the mark. And there's often a sense of, as a result, when we speak of finding healing, when we talk about forgiveness and going to confession and so on, we're seeking to be healed. So there is that sense that when we sin, we actually suffer. Because spiritually, we are harming ourselves. I also wonder if there's an interesting connection between the word passion and compassion. That often, if you have no feeling at all, you don't have compassion either. But yeah, it's the same word. Well, yeah. Intellect, I suppose. Yeah.
So it's sort of a balance between the two things. So you feel, that's how you're human, and you have compassion with your fellow Christians, fellow people, regardless of race or religion or creed. But you also have the intellect to understand what you're doing is not going to be all perfect. And then forgiveness comes into it.
No, that's true. I think there is often in the spiritual life that battle to make the heart and the mind work as one. I think in addition to that, there's also the spirit or the soul, which is something even beyond those. Because the one on its own is, I think faith is about more than just the heart and just the intellect. Because if it's just the heart, that can just mean I believe anything that comes to my head. I believe in, I can believe in fairies or aliens or that the kingdom of God has lots of fluffy white rabbits with big flappy ears. I can anything I want, but that's not. There's more to it than that. We believe that the truth has been revealed to us, so it's not just me believing whatever I want to believe. And also, the kind of faith where it's just feeling, a lot of the time, people are not willing to die for that kind of faith. So I think there's more to it than feeling. I'm not saying it's by any means just intellect. They're Christians as well, and even non-Christians. Yeah, but I don't think that's just because they had a feeling. I think they really believed it. So I think there's more to it than just the heart and just the intellect. But the intellect is not an enemy of faith. This is the other thing people need to understand. That people often see them as opposites, and they're not opposites. A lot of people have the idea that you have to sacrifice your intellectual integrity to be a Christian. That's just a misunderstanding of Christianity. If you actually think, if you just don't know how to read scripture, you don't understand what theology is. You're assuming that you're reading it all like a 6-year-old child and assuming that you can't believe in any scientific facts anymore and stuff, which is it's actually not true if you understand theology a little bit. So these are not opposing virtues. And again, both intellect and emotion on their own can be good and bad if they're not sanctified through virtue. Yeah. Yeah.
So it goes to the opposite too. Somebody who's not feeling wrecked, people that can't do anything, help themselves all again. Because it's so consumed by all the different feelings, hatred, anger, whatever. More feelings, it's too sensitive about certain things you can't really progress.
Yeah, that's very true.
So it's a mixture of two. And then having hope as well, that it's not just this is me. There's something beyond that, beyond what we're doing now. So,
faith, hope and love. Faith, hope and love, and the greatest is love. Sometimes, I think, like I said, there's certain personalities, and we can't expect, like I said, if everyone becomes equally holy, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to be the same. So you might have someone who is more sensitive than another. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But sometimes people are sensitive because, very wounded pride. It's one thing to be, someone might be sensitive, like they'll just get emotional if they just see anything that's horrible, you know, that they see a dog limping on the street and it hurts and it'll make them cry. But it's another thing when you're sensitive, anytime someone says anything to you, you just take it as an insult, or you think, oh, you're insulting me, or you know, you don't respect me and everything. And that's often is pride, that often is wounded pride, that we're just, it might be the combination of pride and that sensitive nature. That as a result, you know, we just always feel that we're being, attacked and picked on. And often that's just a misconception because our perception's been distorted by our pride. Yeah, but like I said, it's kind of, we're talking here a lot about, we're never just talking about just, you know, spiritual life. I mean, for example, like I said, a sensitive person may be no more proud than another person, but combine that with that character of being sensitive, that's how it expresses itself. Not necessarily that they are more proud than someone who isn't so sensitive, but that's how it comes out as a result of their character or their nurture or whatever it is. What we are looking for is not to stop being a certain way, but to purify those passions, and then those other qualities we have, they don't become a hindrance anymore, they become a gift. But prayer is one of the main things that we talk about in spiritual life and in sort of purifying ourselves. But it's, not just one thing alone, but prayer is considered one of the most important things. Yeah. How do we pray in the Greek Orthodox Church? Well, we're going to do another thing on prayer, so. But there's more than one way. Yeah. Well, I'll save that for when we talk about prayer. Yeah. And some just chat to the person next to them as well. No, I mean, look, we'll go through this another time. I'll do something on prayer specifically. There's many forms of prayer. We'll talk about that. Anything else on passions and virtues? I haven't covered many. But...
relation between different passions and then obviously certain passions kind of outlawed by it's up to us really whether or not we sin. But then there's kind of it's actually leaving in one place, it's leaving in another place.
What are you asking exactly? You're saying whether we should only consider passions that are illegal? Because I wouldn't say any passions are.
Make a kind of excuse for the way they behave in the sense that, you know, that's law or that's like rash behaving or...
Right. The thing is, I don't think you'd find any passions in the traditional sense of when we speak of passions in the spiritual life that are, you know, crimes per se. And there's a reason for that. It's because what we are talking about is human nature, things which can lead to those crimes. So yeah, I mean, drug addiction, you know, it's not a passion in that sense, but it may well be the result of it. I mean, when you're talking about addictions, I think you're going into something else here. But for example, someone may be gluttonous when it comes to, let's say, alcohol, and that leads to an addiction. So it may have come from a passion, but that's become a whole other problem of its own, because you just can't stop if you want to, you know. So there may be things like that. But actions themselves are not, you know, when we talk about the passions, we're not actually talking about murder or adultery or whatever like that. That's what comes of the passions a lot of the time. So I don't think this idea that, you know, if I've understood you correctly, the idea that that laws or trends or anything necessarily has anything to do with it. Yes. And do on a daily basis, but sometimes in extremes.
Isn't it also they use issues that intellectually simple and very so take you away from God because gluttony, right? You can't say all fat people are sin, right? You know, will be
Well, let's also be clear that when we are talking about the passions, okay, we are speaking within people of the faith. Really, there's no point in really speaking about these things to people that have no interest at all in God or anything like that. Because until you've got to that point, it's Greek Orthodox. But I mean, many of us, this stuff about the passions is aimed at us who are actually practicing Christians. It's, I think, a different thing. When you're talking about someone that it's not even part of it. I mean, maybe it's not, you have to find other ways of addressing the same problems, because there's no point in, you can't go about it the same way. I mean, if someone, for example, is gluttonous, but they have no sense of sin or righteousness, a lot of things are not actually sins for a lot of people. People don't understand why certain things we consider sinful would be sinful. Because if you take God out of the picture, it doesn't. Again, you're just going back to morality then. We're not going back to trying to be like God. You're also making the mistake of assuming that fat means gluttonous and vice versa, which it doesn't. Yeah, but I know other people that eat 3 times as much as I do, but they're loads slimmer than I am. So, putting on weight isn't the sin. I know that's how women feel.
But I think that's what you're seeing is what somebody. Okay, so when you see a fat person, you think, okay, that person's gluttonous, but it's not that.
It could be, and again, but like I said, a lot of these vices and virtues, they connect to each other. There's a case where often what could lead to gluttony or other things like it wouldn't be the gluttony itself, but anger could lead you to that, in fact, or ingratitude. I mean, a lot of people who just think it's often we get to the point where we get really angry or depressed or whatever. It's like, oh, what's the point? And then we just start stuff in our faces, right? And the sin, the passion there that's fueled that isn't in itself gluttony. They all link together. Yeah, it can be, and if yeah, it can be.
Or then be better looking than the other person.
Yeah. That's why this is going to the last one on it. Yeah, everything in moderation, but don't overdo it.